Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Rachel Trabulsi, and I will be facilitating this session. I'm a member of the Greater Middle East Platform. Today, we will be having the first online meeting from a series of 3 online meetings on sustainability, discussing projects in the MENA region. The first online meeting, titled Rivers of Life in the MENA region, has the objective of showcasing the work being done by partners and local actors. Our speakers today are from Iraq and Egypt. So the focus will be on the work happening there, on activities and projects done on the local and regional level around water protection, water management in times of drought and other environmental challenges. This series of online meetings has been organized as a replacement for the workshop initially planned in Lebanon, which had to be cancelled due to the war in Palestine and the tension in the region. We are experiencing a deep sense of pain, anger, and sadness from the tragic loss of lives and the relentless injustices under occupation inflicted upon people and land. Without justice in one part of the world, there will be no justice and peace all around the world. So we chose to proceed with the meetings, believing that the importance of highlighting a distinct narrative from the Middle East and North Africa. This narrative centers on our local, national, and regional partners and activists from the region who are working collaboratively to build, nurture, and harvest the outcomes of their efforts in a way that aligns with both humanity and the environment. So this event, as you may know, is organized by the Greater Middle East Platform under the Green MENA Network initiative. Links will be shared in the chat for your reference for people who don't really are not very familiar with the platform yet and about the recent works we've been doing. The platform is an independent Dutch foundation of experts with close personal connections to the Arab world and North Africa. Its objective is to humanize the presentation of the MENA region through policy advice and dissemination of knowledge. The Green MENA Network is a project within the platform. Initiated in 2020, it aims to place sustainable actors at the forefront of Dutch aid and trade relations. This initiative has established a robust database featuring over 700 environmentally conscious organizations, activists, farmers, researchers, etc., to facilitate networking and knowledge sharing among green actors in the MENA region. Today, we will be listening to 3 partners who will share their work with us. They'll present their work and their local environments. They will also explore opportunities and their visions for the future. We will discuss challenges, of course, that they encounter and the specific difficulties they face today. Today, we are not going to have with us Yusuf Al-Hashimi. He will not be joining due to a really busy schedule. But we will have with us 3 amazing speakers that I will introduce to you in a bit. Each speaker will have approximately 10 to 15 minutes for their presentation. After all presentations, we'll have a 15-minute together to discuss and ask questions. Please write down any comment, feedback, or question you have during the talks in the chat section. We'll try our best to address all the questions at the end of the meeting. When you write down your question, it's helpful to add your role or institution you're affiliated to and to whom you're addressing your question if needed. And note that this session is recorded, and but only the speakers, I guess, and I will be showing in the recording. I'm not sure, maybe everyone, I'm not sure. And so you can remove your face if you don't want to be in the recording, just to be on the safe side. But show it to us later so we can talk. Please note that this session will be recorded. And then I'm going to start. Everyone's ready? We have like... Okay, so I'm going to start with Benwar. Benwar Abdulrahman is a graduate with a bachelor's degree in biological sciences. Presently serves as a project manager at Waterkeepers Iraq. His main focus is tackling the water crisis and the effects of climate change in Iraq. Alongside his professional role, Benwar is deeply engaged as a volunteer with Leopards Beyond Borders, a group committed to wildlife conservation. In his 20s, Benwar is from Sulaymaniya in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. So, Benwar, I will let you tell us a bit about what you're doing with waterkeepers and beyond. Yeah, the challenges you face and all the future plans. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Rochelle, and thank you everyone for arranging this interview and this online meeting. I'm really excited to talk about these stuff that we are working on, and I'll be happy to share it with you all. We at Waterkeepers Iraq are mainly working in the field of like trying to protect the waterways in Iraq, and also to raise awareness and to generally have a drinkable, fishable, and swimmable water, because the current situation in Iraq and especially the rivers is not very good, and that's what we are aiming for. Over the past 3 years that I've been working with Waterkeepers Iraq, we have conducted surveys, we have done awareness campaigns like art workshops and like meetings with stakeholders and many other things like these things to raise awareness, to show the danger, show the threats, show what should be done, and action plans presented for the public, for the organizations, for the government to be conducted. In particular, I'll talk about this one project that we did in 2022 in Suleymaniya province, where we surveyed the whole river of Tanjaro, which is 120-kilometer river, and it feeds into the Sirwan River, which later feeds into the Tigris River. This river, Tanjaro, is unfortunately mainly polluted, and it's under like a huge threat from human actions. For example, untreated sewage from 2 million people in the city goes directly into the river without any treatment, which sadly is the same case for most of the rivers in Iraq, most of the provinces and all of the populated areas. All of the sewage and untreated goes directly into the river, which is a huge problem for our rivers. And also we counted a lot of threats from power industry, like the energy making industry, for example, the oil refineries and also the oil drills and things like that. And all of these accumulated to 245 threats on the river of Tanjaro, which is a huge alarm for what's happening to this river and in the region. And sadly, this is very similar to what's happening all over the rivers of Iraq. And what we did was that we created a report, and in the report we had action plans for how to mitigate these threats. And thankfully, after this project was completed, we managed to get a partnership with Internews organization, which we started another project that was one of the action plans of the report that we published, which was that we encourage journalists, we train journalists to do more accurate reporting when it comes to environmental journalism. And we are like midway in the project, and we have trained up to 80 journalists online and in person. And other projects, which is also a direct action plan of the Tanjaro River report threat assessment, is that we are working with locals, with local craftsmen, with local people to create a sewage prototype treatment plant to show it to the fundraisers, to show it to the stakeholders, to the government, to the businesses, that we can build sewage treatment plants inside locally without the need to go buy it from another country with lots of money and Through this, we can show that and raise fund for hopefully in the future bring more attention to the sewage problem in the region, and also create these sewage treatment plants to prevent the sewage from going to the river. The problems we face as an organization is, of course, there's the problem with the government, because usually the government, unfortunately, is not that helpful when it comes to these kind of initiatives and these kind of projects. And for one meeting, we have to wait months and months until we get the meeting, for example, with the board of directory or board of environment and directory of environment and stuff like that. Meanwhile, for someone who's doing a business, who is like establishing a oil refinery, they just get it right away. And it's sad for us when the government is not very cooperative in these type of cases. But we conducting like roundtable meetings and things like that to constantly update the government and also reach out to them and work with them to fix these environmental issues. Another issue is that there is a lack of cooperation between organizations in the region. So, for example, here in Iraq, we don't have that many organizations that are actively working on the environment, and also those that do that, they don't cooperate with other organizations to make their voice louder and have bigger impacts. But we at Waterkeeper have always been trying to tackle this issue, and Hamad Dijla, whom Yusuf Hashmi is from, and also Salman Khairallah, we used to work together in 2021. We did a whole year project together as sister organizations. We operated in north of Iraq in Kurdistan region, and they operated in middle and south. And that's usually how we try to tackle the environmental issues in Iraq, by cooperating with other organizations from different regions and working together. And one other problem that I want to mention is, again, the lack of government policies when it comes to international waters. Like the 80% of Iraq's water comes from Iran and Turkey, and unfortunately, all these dams built by Iraq, by Turkey, and also by Iran, and these water tunnels that divert the river tributaries in Iran have damaged the water income for Iraq. So there is now far less water income to Iraq, and this has caused a lot of issues. And along with climate change, it's just like very dark if you think about it. But that doesn't make us stop, and we always work towards like building new connections, and things like these meetings, and collaborating with other organizations from other countries in the region really help to bring this attention together and work together to fix these issues. And luckily, the new generation here is more how to say, like they are more interested in protecting the environment. So that's also one way that we are always focusing on the new generation, through arts, through campaign, through workshops and stuff like that, to encourage them to join the cause of protecting the environment. And what else? When we talk about the future, unfortunately, like I said, climate change is affecting Iraq, and all of these dams and tunnels built by Iran and by neighboring countries is also affecting Iraq in a bad way. And it seems like it's dark, like I said, but it's people like us, it's organizations like us that can create change. And by collaborating together and by working together, we can try to change that trajectory and hopefully create a safer place, and also a more protected rivers and nature for everyone. And I think I think that's all I have to say. If you have questions, if you have like anything regarding this, I can be helpful. And yeah, thanks for giving me the platform. I think you are muted, Rochelle.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, it's very interesting. And I see a question that I also had it written. It's if the government is not cooperative, is your work sustainable? Because I wanted to say the same when it comes to lack of government policies. You know, you say there's 80% of water coming from Iran and Turkey. It creates a problem, whereas you have less water entering Iraq and droughts and the climate change
Yeah,
exacerbating this issue. You know, so if with a lack of government support or cooperation, you know, how do you deal with this, you know, transboundary, if you want, issues
yeah,
like this?
yeah.
You know, what do you do? Is it sustainable indeed?
Yeah. One thing that we usually do is that we work with journalists, both locally and internationally. And this has caused a lot of pressure on the government. Like in the past, we have done documentaries with BBC and other big organizations and filmmaking, documentary making foundations and stuff. And this causes a pressure on the government usually, and also like through raising awareness, through trying to reach out to the people to know what's the real problem and also what's the solutions. It also creates a pressure on the government. So it's not always the government that has to collaborate with us directly, or like we don't see, we see another way to pressure the government into doing things, and that's through journalists and also through the public.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And by the way, the question was raised by Mohammed Saeed Al-Hamaidi, CEO of Palestine Water Sector Regulatory Council. Thank you. We're gonna move to our second speaker, Maha Yassin. Maha is a research fellow at the Institute of Regional and International Studies, IRIS, at the American University of Iraq, specializing in environmental policy, climate security, and activism in Iraq. Previously, she worked as a research fellow and an outreach officer at the Klingendale, the Netherlands Institute for International Relations, managing the Basra Forum for Climate, Environment, and Security. Maha holds an MA in Communication Studies and a Bachelor in Geology. With extensive experience in the humanitarian sector, she specializes in civil society engagement and addressing environmental threats, particularly in the southern region of Iraq. Maha, I will let you tell us a bit what are you busy with at the moment. Tell us about the work you're doing and the different challenges you're facing. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel, and thank you for this kind invitation. Besides my work as a research fellow, I'm also a freelance researcher or consultant focusing on different issues related to water management, impact of climate change on stability and social cohesion. Also the prospect of energy transition in Iraq, and as you said, civil society engagement and the challenges they are facing. Most of my work is research, but I also talk about the issues related to, as I said, the civil society activists in general in Iraq who are facing a big backlash because they are also seen as a political activist, unfortunately. And yeah, the local context where I work is a bit challenging, unfortunately. I focus mostly in the southern part of the country where the impact of the climate change and water management is very big. We hear a lot of resources talking about Iraq as the fifth country affected by climate change, and it's heating, the whole region is heating up faster than the rest of the world. But in my opinion, the bigger share of this problem is how the resources or how the issue is managed in Iraq. The whole region is equally affected by climate change, but we see the GCC states, for example, or Turkey or Iran, they have better policies to respond to this impact. While in Iraq, the whole issue of environmental degradation or climate change is seen as a luxury problem, is not the priority of decision makers or politicians. And that's why you see we are basically affected way more than the rest of the region. And this is something that has been risen by the civil society, by researchers in Iraq, to basically pinpoint the failure or the mismanagement of this issue by the consecutive government in Iraq, and this is why they are facing a lot of backlash. They are seen as a political activists who are destabilizing the situation or the security in Iraq. A lot of them were threatened, some of them were killed, and some of them had to leave the country because of this basically treatment by the decision makers or non-state actors. And the other thing that the civil society are facing is the limited fund and support locally and internationally. I've talked to a lot of civil society members and researchers, and they say despite the international interest in the impact of climate change and in the MENA region, there is no financial support to upscale their activities on the ground. Most of the work or most of what they are doing, and I think Benoit said it, is that raising awareness. This is what they are doing, but project implementation is still very limited and smaller scale. And the government, of course, do not support their activities. And there is also, of course, a lot of political influence internally. So even if there is funds that comes, for example, to the international organizations that is working in Iraq, the UN agencies, these funds are directed to serve certain communities or certain provinces than the rest, which also creates inequality in receiving the support for these communities that is affected. And we see this mostly in the southern part of Iraq, especially the marshes. The marshes is spread across 3 provinces in the southern region of Iraq, namely Dhiqar, Maysan, and Basra. You see that, for example, in Dhiqar, the marshes, even now in summertime, well, not now, but like a few months ago in the summertime, El-Chibaish is flourishing. There is a lot of tourists coming to the region, while in Maysan, the marshes completely dried up. And when I ask people about what is the reason, they say because there is a political influence that directs the international organizations and the local funds, if there is any, to certain areas to serve certain communities than the rest. And of course, a lot of people talked about the influence of the oil industry that is flourishing in this region, where some areas are considered part of oil fields. So that's why there is an intention to keep these areas dry, so the oil companies has a good reason to get into the marshes or to get to this area to start operating over there. And of course, as I said, there's also a little bit of corruption that is involved in all of that. People are benefiting from the involvement of these oil companies, these people work or own companies that support these operations, and this is why you see like how it's run over there, like how the water is managed, how the aid is distributed is quite political in this region in the South Iraq. But talking about the opportunities, of course, I'm drawing a little bit of a dark image here, but of course there is opportunities, and I think as long as there is civil society and people who are aware that there is a bigger problem, there is an opportunity to drive change. And I see this mostly coming from young people, and whether they are like working with organizations, individual activists, or researchers or even journalists who are writing reports and making videos and movies about this impact. It's big and it's growing, but their young people are seeing this and they're trying to do something about it, even though with the very limited resources that they have and also limited capacities that they have. And yeah, talking about how my work can be supported, of course, as a researcher, we still lack a lot of data and access to areas, and this is where we need to be supported. We also like to be in platforms to talk about these issues. So, for example, be invited to this talk with people. This is, I think, a good opportunity to show us our work and to show the problem over there and what is happening over there. But mostly giving us access to larger and bigger platforms where we can connect with not only local decision makers, but also international decision makers who could have an influence on our local politicians and leaders to pay more attention to this problem and make it a priority for the government. Yeah, I think like the role of the international community is also important in this case. Although like we do emit a lot of gas, but we are not the main contributor to the whole issue of climate change. And I think this is something that the international community needs to pay attention to. We need support, and not maybe not financially, because Iraq is a middle income country, it's not a poor country, but the support can be in building the capacities of the governments itself. Like we do have a lot of employees, for example, working for the Ministry of Environment, but the capacity or their engagement is still limited. And also the activists and the civil society, they need to be trained and to have platforms, to have access to data, the same as with the researcher. And as I said, help us to raise awareness internationally, not only locally. And I think this way, yeah, maybe we can have a change on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Mama. Thank you for sharing these challenges. I said that I will do the questions in the end, but as a follow-up question, I have prepared a follow-up question, but also here I see from Hamad Al-Hmaidi saying that although governments are key players, still climate change mitigation measures are not exclusively governmental responsibility. Is there an NGO plan, informal sector plan that is there, like, a mitigation plan? Or
yeah, so the government do have like plans to address the issue. When you read the policies, the formal policies of the government, you see like, wow, this like the problem is going to be solved so easily. But the problem is the implementation and how the people who are supposed to be responsible for the implementation are serious about the issue. There is a big corruption problem, like the funds and the money that is allocated to interfere, to support people, communities is stolen. It's not only the money that is allocated by the government, but also the money that international organizations comes with. I came from a field research trip 2 days from Iraq, and I talked to like people from the marshes in these communities, and they were telling me how the money that's brought by these international organizations were basically distributed unfairly. Nobody, like very few people got the aid eventually. So these are international organizations, let alone the government itself. So the problem is that how you implement it, how do you find this one leader who is really have the integrity, let's say, or the personal interest in helping these people. Most of the people who work for the government itself, or they are assigned to these positions without a deep experience or interest. They have loyalties to their political parties and not to the position that they are serving. And this is why the implementation is usually flawed.
Okay. So when you talk about building trust between government and civil society, is it this, like, because when you say there are people corrupt, they don't have the political will to do anything, and they funnel the funds in a certain direction, how it suits their political agenda. But how do we build trust then in that, between these movements, environmental movements, local civil society and government?
Yeah, this is a good question. I think like one step of building a trust is that bringing these two parties together around one table to discuss the issue, because when a civil society member or when an activist pinpoint a problem, the politicians or decision maker, they see it as a personal accusation. And this is what makes the problem. But these people is they are talking about an issue on the ground affecting thousands and thousands of people. They want to bring help to these people, and this is what both parties need to talk about in an open environment. That eventually the goal is to help people, to support them, to have a healthier environment, and support their livelihood that they are losing. I think like also one step of building a trust is that having a neutral actor that liaise and mediate between the civil society, the communities affected, and the decision makers, political parties, and authorities who are responsible for the implementation. And eventually, like no matter how the civil society and international government or institution worked in Iraq, eventually the government itself are responsible and they should be held accountable. They are the one who own the institutions, know the land, and have a bigger resources to basically make a change on the ground. And I think like excluding them is not going to bring any positive income to the people in the south or in any place in Iraq. The government has to work with the civil society and international organizations together. Otherwise, the situation will still the same.
Thank you, Maha. Okay, we're going to move to our third speaker now. We're going to move more towards focusing on transboundary water issues and management. Lama Al-Hato is an environmental engineer with over 15 years of expertise in water resource management, climate change policy, and renewable energy, holding a bachelor's in construction engineering, a master's in environmental engineering from the American University in Cairo, and a PhD in sustainability from Erasmus University Rotterdam. She has dedicated more than 12 years to the World Bank Group as an environmental specialist at the International Finance Corporation. Her focus has been on climate change and transboundary water management, leading projects like hydropower development in Pakistan and the Benban Solar Park in Egypt. Al-Hato's work has spanned across the Middle East, North Africa, and beyond. Additionally, she contributed as a climate policy officer for the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Welcome, Lama. Lama has a presentation. So you're gonna, tell us a bit what you're doing at the moment and the challenges that you're facing. The floor is yours.
Lama, do you want to share it yourself, or shall I share the presentation?
I think I can share it. Do I have access?
I think yes, and otherwise Silva has to make you host. Yes, that works. Thank you.
We'll see this.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, Rochelle, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you for Silva and everyone for allowing me to speak at this platform today. My apologies, I do have a bit of a flu, so my voice is coming and going, and so my apologies if I'm not the best speaker today, as it is. I also have two beautiful and wonderful speakers that I'm following, and so it's quite challenging to be able to follow and compete with that. So thank you for all of that before. My research, as Rochelle has mentioned, is that I span across transboundary river basins, and my focus research for many years now has been focusing on the Blue Nile River basin between Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan. The context in which I look at this specific river basin is both a personal one, but also a very professional one, in that for years and years, there's been competing claims and tensions around this river basin. But what I've come to notice is that actually, can we, with the sense of urgency that comes with climate change, can we actually use it as an opportunity for cooperation on the Blue Nile River basin, as opposed to this rhetoric and constant narrative of conflict instead? I do also just want to show you the backdrop of this picture here. This is the confluence of the Blue Nile River basin and the White Nile River in Khartoum in Sudan. And here, this picture is, it actually really beautifully delineates the distinct ecological differences between the two different colored waters, between the Blue Nile and the White Nile. The Blue Nile originates from the Ethiopian highlands, and so as it comes down, it goes through enormous amounts of sediments, and so it becomes very rich and brown in color, very rich with nutrients. Whereas the White Nile originates from Jinja in Uganda, and it goes through marshlands and swamplands. And so as it does that, the filtration process clears it up and actually becomes very pristine and clear, hence the name White Nile. When the two rivers, they come and they merge in Khartoum at the confluence, they move together side by side for kilometers and kilometers without mixing. There's absolutely no mixing until there's a tiny little inlet, and then they start mixing naturally again with the dip, and then they move north again towards Egypt as a continuous stream. But up till that point, they move harmoniously side by side without mixing for kilometers and kilometers. And for centuries, Arab poets have called this the longest kiss in history, which is very poetic and very beautiful, but it also, I think, embodies something that's very wonderful about having the two rivers, which bring with it the cultures, the stories of the people and the civil society and communities that live along the Nile on these different bodies of water, and how they can coexist harmoniously for kilometers and for periods of time, for long periods of time, without ever one over-dominating or overpowering the other. I think that's ecologically a lesson that we can learn as social scientists and as scientists from the ecology, the natural ecology of this basin. So I did want to just share that before I begin. So for context, the Nile River Basin, as you can see, is the longest river in the world. It encompasses 11 countries. The Blue Nile, however, which is the context of the research that I've been conducting, originates in the Ethiopian highlands, and it has only the three countries, Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia. And it contributes 80% of the total volume of the water of the Nile River, the entire Nile River watershed. So that's also a very large quantity of water that we need to consider here when we're talking about the proportion of water between both rivers. For years and years, there's been this rhetoric of basically water wars that have gone on and on between the two countries, between Egypt and Ethiopia, around whether or not competing claims of water on this basin. So in 1979, Egyptian President Anwar al-Sadat said that if Egypt were to ever go to war again, it would be over water, which again shows the importance of water and the Nile to Egypt as a potential issue for national security and what that necessarily means. As a response, the late Ethiopian Prime Minister Meles Zenawi said, "I'm not worried that the Egyptians will suddenly invade Ethiopia. Nobody who has tried that has lived to tell the story." Which also goes to show you that there's this rhetoric back and forth between the countries about verbal communications around hostility and violence and almost warfare around this river body on water. But that being said, is that in fact the case? So for background context, it's important to consider what we actually have with three countries and what does the Nile actually mean and represent for the three countries. So what we do know, excuse me. What we do know is that in Egypt is a very water scarce country. It's very water stressed. The only water available to it is in fact the Nile River Basin, and so it's a dependency on water coming from 90% coming from externally from outside its borders is a very large proportion of water for it to be water scarce, water secure, and very dependent on its neighbors. Ethiopia, so when it looks at the Nile, it looks at it from a sense of water security. Ethiopia, on the other hand, is very diverse in terms of its water mixture. There are regions that are very, very water plentiful, other regions that are not. But overall, when it actually looks at the Nile, it doesn't look at it from a sense of water perspective. It looks at it in terms of hydropower. Ethiopia only has 30% of the entire country is actually connected to the electricity grid. So if we understand this context, that its pursuit of looking at the Nile is more for electrifying the country as opposed to actual water security, then we understand that its development purposes here are much more for hydropower in order to be able to enhance that. And hence the construction of one of the largest dam in Africa, which is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam on the Blue Nile, is one of the most contested infrastructure projects because of this idea that it may limit potential water downstream towards countries such as Sudan and Egypt. But the idea behind looking at the Nile River Basin for Ethiopia isn't around water per se, but it's around energy and energy security. So it's understanding that its lens of looking at the Nile is more from an energy perspective. Similarly, if we look at Sudan, Sudan has been for decades and decades has been pegged as the breadbasket of the Middle East, providing food security for countries in the Gulf and across the Middle East countries. So when it looks again at the Nile, it looks at it from a sense of irrigation and food security and agriculture. How can it intensify its agricultural commodities as well for export and for its income and for development? So here it looks at it from food security. So if we understand that each of these countries is looking at the Nile from a very different lens, Egypt is looking from water, Ethiopia is looking at it from energy, and Sudan from food, we can here end up looking and attempting to apply what we often refer to as the WEF nexus, which is the water, energy, food nexus. The WEF nexus is a platform which looks at the integration and synergies between those three sectors, water, energy, and food, and how we can find mutual benefit sharing, cooperation opportunities between them if we expand beyond just water and just the river and look at the various other sectors of how there could be cooperation amongst them. So when we look at a lot of the theory that has been done around transboundary river basins, we'll understand that actually a lot of the data that this rhetoric that we see around water wars with the next World War III is going to be around water really is just a lot of it is sensationalist media. If you look at the evidence, the empirical evidence that comes down to it, and Professor Aaron Wolf in the University of Oregon did a wonderful work on this for many years ago, where he looked at all of the transboundary river basins across the entire globe and was able to see which ones have actually gone towards conflict over them and which haven't. And from his empirics, from the studies, we've actually been able to see that we are actually more inclined on transboundary river basins, more inclined to move towards cooperation than we are towards conflict. And if we understand this shift right here, we begin to see that we have more at stake for us to actually move towards cooperation, and there's more to work for in that sense, which is a very positive thing. What we also know is that conflict and cooperation are not linear. They actually coexist dynamically at the same time. And Nahomi Rumashi did enormous amounts of work on this as well as an academic coming out of King's College in London, and the amount and the work that she did was also revolutionary in understanding that it's not one or the other. It's both. We can both sit and have tensions with one another, but at the same time be at a table where we sit and negotiate and have cooperative levels of negotiations. And that dynamic shift in that nature of dynamic interactions makes all the difference in how we understand transboundary river basin relationships a lot more. And then lastly, in the face of climate change, we do see now that there is a sense of urgency and a will to action. If that is the case, can climate change then also have a sense of opportunity for cooperation on this basin, on the Blue Nile River Basin? So we look at many of the drivers that lead towards conflict and cooperation, and I won't bore you with all of these today, But a lot of the literature that is shown is that population growth has been a driver, things like river basin organizations, water scarcity, benefit sharing, all of these have led to different drivers that motivate countries towards conflict and cooperation. And they can be categorized into environmental drivers, social drivers, political drivers, or economic drivers. And it's no secret that if we look at generally from the empirics and from the research that was conducted from the 3 countries, that the economic drivers were the main driving force towards cooperation within the 3 countries. So what's interesting is that if we understand that paradigm and we can begin to see the levels of cooperation that can take place on this basin, we can look at it in terms of just looking at, if you look at the first map, within the countries, you'll see that here this is only looking at water cooperation on the basin on behalf of just the Blue Nile, the surface water of the Blue Nile River basin itself, and that's it. So here we only talk about water allocation, sharing, and monitoring. But if we move towards the second map, here we're looking at it looking at the watershed. If we understand and we take the watershed as a whole, here we're looking at much more transboundary resource cooperation, looking at interbasin development, we're looking at benefit sharing opportunities. We're looking at it from much more holistic aspects such as energy and food, and not necessarily just in terms of water. If we take a step further, and we look at it beyond the river basin, and we look at it in terms of the actual countries themselves and what they can provide in terms of Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan, beyond the river itself, we're looking at trade opportunities. We look at bilateral agreements, we look at financial exchange, and how that can actually be extended beyond cooperation of just looking at the river itself. And then lastly, is the ideal mode of regional cooperation is that if we look at it as an ecosystem as a whole, we break down the borders, theoretically speaking, for this purpose, and look at this watershed and as an entire ecosystem, and we understand and look at waves of how we can actually have financial integration, cooperation, and economic integration between the 3 countries as an entire mode for cooperative means within those countries. It may seem idealistic, but there have been many opportunities we've seen across many countries around the world. The EU is a prime example. Many of the other states have done this across. There have been prime examples where this can be achieved. So lastly, in order to be able to see what we need to do, some of the potential policy recommendations include we need to change the narrative. Understanding that this is a river basin that is not just entailing looking at cooperative means for one state and one state alone. This is a shared ecosystem. This is an ecosystem shared by many countries, and having an understanding of shared solution for a shared problem. Climate change will impact all of them, and hence having that understanding that the solution needs to be encompassing all of the regional countries together is important. With that, we need to increase the priority of climate change regionally. For the longest time, climate change was kind of put on the back burner, considered an environmental issue, not a top priority. Pardon me. And in that, we need to increase its priority in national plans, national action plans, and how climate change can be mainstreamed across into national policies as well as regionally. We need to envision the ecosystem as a whole. What does this mean in terms of giving rights to the river? Many countries have actually begun doing this. Ecuador has begun doing this, Bolivia. If you start looking at now, understanding that the ecosystem, the river itself, has also rights, then we can start looking at environmental flows and how environmental flows dictate as well. They become a stakeholder and a shareholder in this river basin. It's not just the countries, it's not just the communities, it's not just the users and the ecosystem services that they provide, but the river itself has a voice. It becomes a stakeholder in the process itself, which becomes very important. Another one is developing transboundary plans. So if we look at, for instance, a lot of the plans, for instance, that are being produced by one country, they potentially could go against the plans that are being dictated on the waterfront or on the energy front or agriculture in another country. So if we begin to have more transboundary and regional plans and that integration between the countries for development, that needs to be quite enhanced quite a bit. We need to establish a new institutional architecture. As of yet, there is a river basin organization. There's the Nile Basin Initiative, which encompasses all 11 countries, but there has been enormous contention around that river basin organization in the past. And many of the countries have spoken, particularly to having a new institutional architecture that can govern the basin, particularly when it comes to the Blue Nile itself within those 3 countries. Engaging the stakeholders. I know Maha and Benoit have discussed this extensively, and I cannot emphasize this more myself, is that including all of the communities, the civil society actors, including all of the persons that are involved in the most vulnerable groups within the process, is absolutely imperative and important in this process. I cannot emphasize this more enough. Capacity building is also very, very important to ensure that there is equity happening on various levels between the basin and the stakeholders as well. And lastly, also looking at how action needs to be done both at the local level as well as the transboundary level. When we talk about this a lot, we always talk about what our governments need to do in terms of cooperation on the government level and on the transboundary level, but there is so much that also needs to be done on the local level, not just on the nationally within the state, within the country, but even on a district level, on a city level, on a governorate level, that the local stakeholders and local community members need to take action and are in many cases taking action, I would have to say, to make sure that there is proper sustainability taking place across this river basin. To end, I want to mention a quote that was mentioned by from the Empirics by an Ethiopian respondent that I found honestly very, very positive and really segue towards cooperation on this basin. And he mentioned that the way the countries handle climate change and work around it can contribute to the relationship between the countries in a positive or a negative way. What is important for countries here is to understand the implications of climate change, to understand what is happening, and that they have to actively join to capture the opportunity that is there. When they do, if they can, it will be positive. Thank you very much for your attention. And with that, I think I can stop the share.
Thank you, Lama. Thank you. It's so interesting. I wanted to ask the Maha or yeah, either Maha or sorry, Benwar. So I wanted to ask, how does this regional, you know, how do I call it, more conflict, or when there is this tension between you know, cross-border cooperation around the Tigris, Afrati and Tigris, how does this work in your context? You know, this cooperation, regional cooperation, is there? I don't know if it's clear.
Yeah, maybe I can start, but I think Benwar is the expert and Lama as well. I think like in Iraq, there is no like agreement or like an official agreement. There is some understanding between the 2 countries, and it's not binding. So that's why Turkey has never been consistent in the amounts of water that is releasing to Iraq. And they do have the Southern Anatolian project, I think, where it consists of establishing several dams. I think they started in the 60s and they continue. And I think the last one was Eliso, and there's another one which is even bigger. So it seems like their damming project continues despite a lot of delegations that Iraq has sent to Turkey and the promises of the Turkish side to increase the amount of water released. But as I said, they are also affected by the impact of the climate change. So but the response is better. That's why they are keeping the water. Mm-hmm. It's also the problem of the Iraqi negotiator and also the position of the political position of Iraq is unstable. That is why it's used against Iraq, basically to control water. For example, in southern Iraq, we always had the problem of the saltwater intrusion. It is like one of the main issues that is affecting water quality. Besides, of course, water pollution, we do have desalinization. And this problem has been growing for decades. And I think in 2018 was the breaking point where the pollution and salinization was too much. That is basically poisoning anyone who puts the water in their mouth, not even swallowing it. This year, one river that was cut or stopped or diverted inside Iran since, I think, 2010. The water from this river was released to Shatt al-Arab in southern Iraq, and hugely affected positively the quality of water. The saltwater intrusion was basically pushed back to the Gulf, and we do not have the problem of saltwater intrusion at least this year. And when I talk to the people and researchers and analysts over there, a lot of them agreed that this is done because of a political agreement between Iran and Iraq, because the current government, the framework government, has a loyalty, or it's closer to the Iranian side or to the Iranian politicians. And there were expectations that 2023 will be another 2018 in Iraq, because the drought has continued or entered its fourth or third year in Iraq, and it was has a quite impact in the south. So there was like a political agreement that Iran releases the water, and that's why the Basra this year passed in the summer month without any bigger protest. So this is like what I want to say. I think is that if the government is strong, if the government has a loyalty, has an influence, the problem can be solved. And as Lama explained in her presentation, eventually it's a political. It's not all the climate change. It's also a political problem or an issue. Yeah.
Yeah, I also
Thank you.
sorry. I also wanted to just say that very well put, firstly, by Maha. And I think over the last 2-3 decades, Turkey and Iran also have taken advantage of the whole instability of Iraq, and like the wars, the regime changing, and ISIS, and all of these things. They took advantage of it by building all these dams and like starting them and operating them and preventing the water. And now it's almost as if it's too late to try to prevent them from cutting the water. But with right policies and with right approach, I think it's still possible. And just like Lama said, it's if it's seen as a regional water and not just one country's or these countries, then I think the solution is easy to get. But yeah, that's the situation is like what Maha said also.
Thank you, Benwar. I have a lot of questions, but the time is up, unfortunately. I would like to first thank you so much, Benwar, Lama, and Maha, for your contributions. It was very valuable. A very short time, unfortunately, to discuss such a beautiful topic. And I thank everyone for being here today.